We have several people from the Farms Research Group, so we appreciate them coming. And we have Scott Pearson, who's here from ZLMB, Science Lighthouse Message Board. You can wave, Scott. That's okay. And we have several of the webmasters from various other websites, apologetic nature here. And certainly you should go around and meet people, get to know them, learn their names. In fact, one of those website owners is our next speaker, right? Russell Anderson comes from farming ancestry. He's first of all on a farm in Idaho, and then moving to the heart of the Columbia Basin in Washington State. He remembers having an intense interest in the history of doctrines of the church in his youth. His mother gave him "No Man Knows My History" while he was still a teenager. I'm thinking, why am I having trouble with this? It's because I'm not wearing my glasses. These are new, so I'm having trouble. Much better. His mother gave him "No Man Knows My History" while he was still a teenager. Later, while on a mission in Florida, Russell used Hugh Nibley's response to the book to answer one investigator's questions. Instead of denying the church, the investigator was baptized. Russell's an applications engineer for Texas Instruments. He and his wife Karen live in Arizona and are parents of 7 children. And I know he maintains the website. What's the name of it exactly?
It's lightplanet.com.
Lightplanet.com. And so with that, we'll turn the time over to Russ Anderson.
Thank you very much. It's a good chance to get here and associate with more of the apologetics folks and so forth. The artwork that Carrie's done is really neat. It reminds me, Carrie lives up there in Idaho where it snows, and he likes to go skiing. And one time he got hit by the chairlift, and so he filed an insurance claim, and they came back and said, "We won't pay it." He says, "Why won't you pay it?" "Well, if you can get hit by a chairlift, that means you're an idiot. That's a pre-existing condition." So anyway, we're going to tell some of the things that some might consider humorous, but we'll go into the 1826 trial. There's a lot to cover, and maybe we won't hit your hot points, but hopefully we'll give you a little better perspective or some understanding of the trial itself, or what's called the trial. Let's go ahead. My friend Philip here will be hitting the buttons for me. I just want to tell you, when we build our house up in Utah, we now live in Arizona, we need to get it perk tested. And one of the questions, we had springs on the property, we're worried about water for having a basement. And a friend of mine at work would do dowsing. In fact, he claimed to be quite accurate as far as judging how deep the water was. So we brought him out, he got his dowsing rods, which are basically just a couple metal rods. And as you walk across, the rods would cross. I wish we had a mic that you could walk with, but anyway, you could. And then how far it was from where the rod started to cross to while they were fully crossed was the distance how far underground the water was. And so we measured, it looked like we had like 3 different spots that maybe there's water underground, but they're down like 12 feet. And so that's where we dug with the backhoe, but we could never get the water. There was a little further than the backhoe could get. Does dowsing work? Well, you could have arguments both ways. There was a professor at Utah State which did an interesting study where he thought maybe it was related to magnetic influence of water. And so he did a magnetometer over the same areas where other people had gone to try to see if they could judge where there was water. And the study was not conclusive, but he didn't necessarily try to pick people who dowsed either. So now let's go on. And so that, in today's world, there are still people who do dowsing, there's companies and so forth. We go back to the 19th century, and they not only dowsed, but there was things with seer stones, treasure digging. They're all part of that culture. I'm going to turn this a little bit. Look at it better. And all these aspects represented, they're a godly gift is the way they recognize these things. Let's go on. And in fact, this is an interesting, from a newspaper in Palmyra, the Palmyra Herald of July 24th, 1822, it talks about digging for money hidden in the earth is a very common thing, and in this state, it is even considered an honorable and profitable employment. One gentleman digging 10 to 12 years ago found a sufficient quantity of money to build him a commodious house. Another dug up $50,000. Now you can imagine, if you were a 16-year-old living in Palmyra, if these are the kind of things you would read in the newspaper. You'd be out there digging, like other, actually fairly respectable people still were doing. Let's go on. And so let's think about how Joseph Smith fits in the environment. And that's the key here, is not putting our environment on Joseph Smith, but looking at Joseph Smith in his environment. Brigham Young made the comment that the seer stone which Joseph first obtained, he got in an iron kettle 25 feet underground. He saw while looking in another seer stone which a person had, and then he went to the spot, dug it up, and found it. And then also, we have from B.H. Roberts, there's another seer stone he mentions, a chocolate-covered stone, somewhat egg-shaped. It was found while the prophet was digging for a well for Mr. Clark Chase. And then from the Holbert affidavits, it's hard to construct a lot of, well, as Bushman puts it, it's presumptuous to reconstruct the narrative events, but taken as a whole, they certainly attest a fascination with spirits, treasure, and magic. And also, even Christians were involved in Money Digger. We've got the money diggers can be readily cited of faith in the reality of the invisible powers described in the Scripture. Christian beliefs in angels and devils make it easy to believe in guardian spirits and magical powers. Now, I was in Nauvoo this last summer. My family and I went back to tour the Nauvoo Temple. And while I was there, I visited the Christian bookstore. And prominently displayed on the counter of this bookstore was this document. The document that was discovered in 1971, Judge Neely's bill. Let's go to the next slide, where it itemized his bill for expenses. It's got saying, meaning the public, versus Joseph Smith, the glass worker, March 20, 1826. The charge is misdemeanor, and for my fees and examination of the above cause, $2.68. Now the question, in fact, Colleen Ralston made a statement. Our good friend Wes Walters said that he found those bills in the courthouse. All the rest of the records were damaged, but these were preserved. He said it was as if God had preserved them for his purpose. Now, I thought about that statement because I knew what Walters had published and that he had pulled them out of the courthouse, and I thought, well, if he really believed that God had preserved them, I guess he didn't think he was preserving them well enough. Because the next slide shows he indicated that they were suffered from dampness, but had severe water damage as well. And so they pulled them out and took them to Yale to get them preserved, which actually causes some other problems. Let's go on. Because once you take and remove a document from its historical setting, and then you try to restore it to that setting, you can't prove that it was ever a continuation. You can't prove that you didn't damage it or do something to it in the process, and so you essentially maybe ruined the historical authenticity, or at least compromised it. So, why is the trial important? Or why do some people consider it to be important? First of all, we'll look at what the trial is. We'll look at why the discovery of the bills in 1971 by Neely and Dzing might be significant, and why the critics delight in looking at this, and then we'll look at what the whole process of the trial tells us. First of all, in the events of 1825 and 26, Josiah Stoll came to Palmyra and talked to Joe Smith, was anxious for him to come and help him with digging for some ancient treasures, because he'd heard that Joe Smith possessed keys which he could discern things invisible to the natural eye. And while he was there, Joseph looked in the stone and described Josiah Stoll's home, his outbuildings, even a hand painted on a tree. So he went then later in that year, after the crops were in, after he'd gone back to the Hill Cumorah again. Then in November, he went and he dug with Josiah Stoll and other people as a part of this whole company. And after laboring for actually less than a month, he persuaded Stoll to give up the enterprise. But he continued to work for Stoll in the area, and he worked for others as well. But he did find one treasure in the area, and that was the fact that he boarded with Isaac Hale and found his future wife, Emma. So the 1826 trial was